we will be taking notes on the first topic in Unit 2, which is on understanding relations and functions. So for these notes, there are a few key concepts and vocab words that we need to understand. The first is an ordered pair is a set of inputs and outputs, and those represent a relationship between the two values. So usually we see them like this. An ordered pair is in parentheses, there's a comma in between them, and we usually call them X, comma, Y. So an example, we could say 1, 2, that is an ordered pair. A relation is just a set of inputs and outputs. A function is a specific type of relation that has one output for each input. The domain is the set of possible input values. The range is the set of possible output values. And then we have the vertical line test, which is a visual way to determine if a function is, if a relation is a function. So all of these words, we're going to cover all of those in each of the examples that we have in the notes. So let's just start with example 1. So consider the following set of ordered pairs. So from these ordered pairs, we have 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 1, 2. From these ordered pairs, we can create an input-output table to represent the relation and find the domain and range. So the input is going to be the X value. So input is our X values. So if I'm looking at each of these ordered pairs, remember it goes X, comma, Y. If you forget which is which, just remember that it's in alphabetical order. X comes before Y in the alphabet. So our first input, we look at this right here. So that's input 0. Our second input is 0 again. Third input, 0 again. And fourth input is 1. Our outputs are the other ones. So these are the Y values. So first one is 0. Second one is 1. Third one is 2. And our fourth one is 2 again. All right, so we made an input-output table. That's one way of representing this relation. We can also write down the domain and range. So going back to our words up here, a domain is the set of possible input values. So if I look at my inputs here, we have 3 zeros and a 1. So that means my possible input values are 0 and 1. And to represent the set for the domain, we just put these curly brackets around them and we list the numbers with commas. For the range, those are my possible output values. And for these, we have 0, 1, and 2. So even though 2 happens twice, we only need to list it once. So those are my possible output values. All right, so that's 2 ways to represent what's going on with this relation. We can also represent the relationship between the input and output values using what we call a mapping diagram. So when we make a mapping diagram, I'm going to put my input here in the left circle. So my input is 0 and 1. So this is the input. Now, again, we don't need to list all of the zeros. So we have 0, 1 for my input, output goes here. So this is our range. So 0, oops, what happened there? Oops, that's weird. Let's erase that. All right, so for my output, we have 0, 1, and 2. So the mapping diagram, we draw arrows from the input to its corresponding output. So when I'm going to use my table for this. So for 0, that maps to an output of 0. My second ordered pair was 0, 1. So I start at 0 again. And I map to 1 for my output. Then I go to 0 again. And I map to 2 for my third ordered pair. And then the last one goes from 1 to 2. So we go to 1 and we map over to 2. All right, so what I noticed about this is that 0, this input 0, has 3 different outputs. 1 only has one output at 2, but my input has 3 different outputs for 0. So I'm just going to draw our attention back to the definition of a function. A function is a relation with one output for each input. And that's not the case here because 0 has 3 outputs. Now 1 only has one output, but 0 has 3 outputs, so that's a problem. So this is not a function. So do these ordered pairs represent a function or just a relation? I'm going to say not a function. Function. Because the input zero has 3 outputs, and it can only have one in order for it to be a function. So it's not a function. This is just a relation. Again, a function is a specific type of relation, and it's not that. It's just a relation. All right, let's look at the next example. So now we have another set of ordered pairs, 0, 0, -1, 1, 1, 2, and 2, 2. Okay, so let's create an input-output table. So remember that input is x, output is y. So my first one is 0, 0. So that's the first point, x, y. My second one is -1, 1. That's this point right here. Then we have 1, 2. And the last one is 2, 2. So for the domain, I list the set of all possible input values. These are actually all different. So 0, -1, 1, 2. So I'm going to list all of them. 0, -1, 1, 2. And then for my range, I list all the possible output values. So 0, 1, 2, 2. Oops, I made a mistake. We don't need to list the 2 twice for this one. So for these domain and range, it's just the possible values. So you don't need to list a number if it happens multiple times. All right, so let's create our mapping diagram now. So for the domain, we have 4 different numbers. So we have 0, -1, 1, 2. For the range, we have 0, 1, and 2. And then we have to map which input values map to each output value. So 0, looking back up at my table, so 0 maps to 0. So I start at 0 in my input, and that gives us 0 as an output. For -1, that maps to 1. 1 maps to 2. Just following these input-output. Then for my input of 2, maps to 2. So here's what's different about this one. You see that each of these 4 inputs only gives us 1 output. Now it doesn't matter that 2 different inputs have the same output, that's fine, because 1 maps to 2 and nothing else, 2 maps to 2 and nothing else, -1 maps to 1 and nothing else, and 0 maps to 0 and nothing else. The difference here is that we had 0 mapping to 3 different things, and that's not okay for it to be a function. So in this case, do these ordered pairs represent a function? Yes. I don't know why I put a T there. Yes, because each input has only 1 output. All right, so let's move on to the vertical line test. So the vertical line test is used to determine if a graph of a relationship is a function or not. If you can draw any vertical line that intersects more than one point on the relationship, then it's not a function. Okay, so does the following graph represent a function? So the way you're going to want to think about this is if, oops, get that out of there. So if I were to draw a vertical line anywhere on this graph, literally anywhere. Does this graph of the line intersect it only one time? So let's look at this first vertical line I drew here. This line, the graph of my function here, only intersects right there. So that's only one time, so that's good. My next line only intersects right there, so that's good. My next line only intersects right there, so that's good. So all of these vertical lines only intersect my graph one time, so that means it passes the vertical line test. So yes, this is a function because it passes the vertical line test. All right, let's move on to the next one. So does this represent a function? So this one's a little different because this is a scatter plot, so we have individual dots. So we can actually draw a line through each of these dots and see if it only intersects once. So yes, this one, this vertical line, only has one dot on it. I'm going to draw a vertical line at my next dot. This only has one dot on it right there. Next one, right here. And that only has one dot on it, but look at what happens here. If I draw a vertical line here, it goes through 3 dots, which is a problem. So it goes through this 1, 2, 3 times. So that's a problem. So this fails the vertical line test. Which tells us that this is not a function. Okay, so does this represent a function? Let's see, let's draw vertical lines. So no matter where I draw a vertical line on this, the vertical lines only intersect this graph at one point. So this little upside down V thing, no matter where I draw one of these red lines, the red line is only going to intersect it at one point. So yes, let's erase that. So yes, it is a function because it passes the vertical line test. Next example, does this represent a function? So we've got another scatter plot here. So we draw a vertical line through each of these. And this looks great because each of these dots, for every vertical line I draw, there's only one dot on the vertical line. So yes, because it passes the vertical line test. All right, last one. So now we've got this swirly function here. So let's start drawing vertical lines. That one's good. Only passes once. This one is good. It only passes once. But look at what happens when we have a vertical line over here. It passes it. Goes through the function 1, 2, 3 times. And that's a problem. So these 3 intersection points means it fails the vertical line test. So it is not a function. And that's it for our introduction to relations and functions.